Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Coomber. I'm glad I have an actual audience in addition to the camera because I've never done that before. I work with the Quest program. I'm the assistant director for the program, and my primary responsibilities are in corporate relations. Basically, the way that what you guys are doing, my students do every year. They go out and they actually work with companies to kind of provide some sort of service for a variety of different clients. We work with Unilever, we work with ATK, working with a solar panel firm this year. It's pretty cool. We work with Easy Storage, a bunch of different firms every year. It kind of changes year to year. So my primary job is to go out and do the scoping. The students do the work, and they do the kind of come up with a final statement of work with their clients. They do their own action plan. But I've had a lot of experience in kind of finding good products for them and then getting them off on the right path. The other thing is I will use some of my own personal kind of projects that I've run as an example here. I'm also a PhD student over in the ed school doing some work in organizational theory and leadership. So I'm currently in my dissertation phase and I should finish by May. I'm going to use an example here of a research project that I did. It's not quite consulting, but in a lot of ways it is, because you still have to sit down and do a statement of work. You have to do an action plan. You kind of have to bid on it. We had an RFP that we had to respond to. So they'll use that as my example to give you a little bit of insight, since normally what I'll do is I'll have the teams kind of work together on certain things, and this is going to be a little bit more of a lecture format because we have fewer people here who are in the audience. So I'll go ahead and start and just kind of want to get your questions. So when you think about scoping and running your project, what are some concerns that come to mind that you want to make sure that we address today?
Scope creep.
Okay, scope creep. And I think hopefully we'll be able to get to that today, but the idea of what I'm going to be talking about, and I've talked with a lot of my alums who are out in the consulting world about this, is that we're going to get you off on a good start so that scope creep won't become a problem. Or if it does become a problem, then you'll be able to address it in a way that's really manageable. Other issues about scoping that you guys are concerned about? Yeah.
I didn't understand what you mean by
Scope creep, sure. Yeah, it's one of those consulting terms that people just throw around, and it's like, oh, what does that mean? It's also a really good point to make sure that when you're talking with your client, make sure that you understand the same language. If someone says benchmarking, I had this issue this summer. Someone came to me and said, I want your students to do benchmarking. Okay, they don't do benchmarking. Benchmarking is an extremely long, drawn-out process. We're involved in going in all these different companies, seeing how they perform on certain metrics. He meant something totally different by benchmarking. So understanding the terms is a really important part of getting your scope done. So scope creep is when you sit down with a statement of work. Sometimes in your examples, you may not have a statement of work. You may have a client who doesn't really know what they need help with. We have that problem a lot. So they may sit down and they want you to do everything, the sun, the moon, and the stars. If you don't sit down and write out a very specific statement of work, later on in the semester you could find yourself having a miscommunication with the client where they say, well, I thought you were going to build us a website. And you're like, oh, we never said that. We were going to do this and design a prototype for a website for you, but we don't have the skill set to actually design the website for you. So scope creep is when the scope creeps along and changes. And it's a really easy thing to happen. It happens for big clients like Booz Allen. It happens for you guys. So there's always going to be the client loves what you're doing. They want you to do more. Or they're like, well, that's not what we wanted. We changed our mind halfway through the semester. I mean, these are real issues that people deal with, both in my class and the projects that they do and also in the real world. So that's what we mean by scope creep. Other concerns, when you guys think about scoping your project in general, what are some concerns that you have? Hi. Oh, no problem. We're just talking a little bit about concerns for the scope of the project and what you're concerned about. Yeah?
I'd say just kind of logistical reality.
Okay.
Think of something that's reasonable, worthwhile, but doable.
Okay. So just kind of creating a project that you can actually complete. Other concerns, yeah.
At the same time, not tackling too less.
Okay. So creating like the right, it's kind of like about, the right size, the right fit for the scope. Something that is, you guys have, it's approximately probably at this point 12 weeks to work on your projects. We normally say for our students, if you just joined us, I work with the Quest program. And so the projects that we do are very similar to the ones that you guys will be working on of the Center for Social Value Creation. So in my class, the capstone class, the students, we say it's about 100 person hours per student. So the client gets about 500 person hours of work. However, that kind of breaks itself down. But that's, you kind of get an idea of what that means. And for a lot of people who have hired consultants out before, they know what that means. For you guys, if you're working with a nonprofit that's a little more green and hasn't had consultants before, you may have to define that for them. So I think kind of coming up with the right size scope of what you guys know you can do within the course of the semester and that fulfills some of their needs. Other concerns? One of my concerns, always with the project, is making the client happy. Without, of course, doing things that are outside of scope or outside of what your skill set is. In Quest, the clients pay for their projects, and so I have a really vested interest in making sure that they're happy. And it's tricky because I'm basically going out there saying, hey, make sure it's still dashed. Hey, my students are going to do this great work for you. They're amazing students. They're the best you've ever seen. And then they have to, deliver on the promise. It's not me delivering on those promises, it's my students. Because they have skill sets in engineering and computer science and computer engineering that I don't have. I could not do the projects they do. So hopefully we'll address these about getting the right size scope, making sure it's not too nebulous and making sure it's not too small. And also just making sure that the client's happy. So we'll go back. All right, so our goals for today and next week. So are most of you planning on attending again next week as well? I guess it depends on how I do today. So if the idea is that this is kind of a partner session, that today we'll talk a little bit about first creating a strong team, and second, designing a statement of work that's doable for the semester. And next week we'll talk a little bit about action plan, and I think we'll address scope creep quickly at the end of this in case you can't attend next week or whatever, but we'll talk about it in relationship to kind of designing the statement work from the outset, but then we'll talk about it again next week in a little more detail about how you can address some of those issues if your client suddenly says they want something totally different. So first steps. This is sort of the Quest way, and I think it's also the exec education way if you guys know about our exec ed programs that are here. You're on a team. You guys have been formed into teams already? Do I have any teams here? Are you guys a team? No. What are some of the projects that you're working on, just so I can get a sense? You haven't gotten your project yet, or?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
We are working on an education project.
Okay.
It's the Association of Public Charter Schools.
Oh, great. Okay. So, other projects in the room?
We're both working on Cable for Two.
Okay.
It's an organization that works to decrease obesity in the industrialized world, and at the same time increase, give more or help out people who might need food.
Okay, great. Other projects? Yeah.
It's a nonprofit that supplies tech support for other nonprofits
Oh.
free by having tech people volunteer their time.
Oh, cool.
So they're part of a smaller or another nonprofit. They're looking to see if they want to branch out on their own and expand
Okay.
their local city that they're in.
Where are they located?
They're in Charleston,
South Carolina.
Yeah.
That's going to be challenging. Are you going to travel down there at all?
We don't know.
Be a nice vacation destination, I think, in addition. Other projects that you guys are working on, yeah.
Bird's Nest, and they're a media company, and they're going to be launching a website.
Okay, so you're launching a website. All right. Anyone else? Yeah?
Class Acts Arts
Okay.
is a nonprofit located in the DC area, and they promote like musical performances and various different types of cultural entertainment for schools and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do they have a scope yet, or?
I'm not sure.
Not sure. that's a,
Well, ours is in Alaska. It's the
Oh,
Alaska
wow.
Community Action on Toxics.
okay.
So I don't always see like a clear scope they want to do because they have looking at having clean air, clean water, and clean food.
Mhm.
Some side projects they're working on. So it kind of seems nebulous right now.
Yeah. I have a feeling, I know that, so I taught with Melissa Carrier a class last semester that was a nonprofit projects like these in class, and a lot of times the clients don't necessarily know what they want, which is a bigger challenge here. You have some scoping done, but they see you and they're like, oh, you have so much talent, you have so much energy, and you can do all these things. And so it's really important right from the get-go, and you guys are in the right spot, right place to nip that in the bud to a certain extent and encourage their enthusiasm, encourage them to be excited, but then really set down a specific set of goals that you can and will accomplish in the course of the semester. So that's really important that we're doing this now, because there might be a lot of sort of, well, we don't know, what can you do for us? And you may actually, in some ways it's good, because you may get a chance to design a little bit what you can offer them. Looking at the strengths of your team and your skills, you might actually be able to offer them something a little more specific.
For us, I guess our scope has been, because they partner with restaurants and diners and stuff.
Yeah.
So our purpose is basically to research on what kind of partnerships would be beneficial for the organization
Okay.
in the area.
So that's actually one that I think comes up a lot in these nonprofit projects, is kind of researching new partnerships. Are you happy with that scope so far?
I mean, we haven't really started, but I think it's a good point to start
from. Yeah, and you can see where that would develop. There actually may be more in that than it at first glance, which is what I found with a lot of these scopes. So sometimes the scope being too small, it depends on how you define it. Okay, so we do have some teams here, but we're not going to be able to go through some of the big team stuff. This is sort of the Quest way. You want to start off with a strong team. And what that means for us is that we always have a team charter. These are some things that you guys have a purpose. You're here. Obviously, you have an interest in helping social good. Maybe you think also, and this is a pretty common goal too, is this is a great way to get some consulting experience if this is a career that you're interested in. So you all have an individual purpose for being here, and I would encourage you to talk about that with your teams. What is your group purpose for getting together? We want to help the environment. We're real drawn to education. We're drawn to this idea of fighting obesity. But we also want to get some real world skills that we can go out and talk about when we go on interviews. So get together your team purpose and find out why your team's there, and I think come up with a reason why you're all here together. It's really important. Second is there's a lot of times there's going to be a lot of differences in the teams. These may not be people that you've worked with before. In Quest, we're lucky because these students have been together for a lot of times, but even in their senior consulting class, we put them on project teams and they may not know each other very well. So I know the MBA folks in the room have probably done an MBTI test. Talking about what your type is with your team is helpful. If you're an entire team of introverts, you might need to think about that. I think my team that I work on here at the Smith School is an entire team of introverts, so we have to work on that, and sometimes I have to be the more extroverted one. Oh, no, that's not good. So, sure, okay. Finding kind of that neutral language to talk about your strengths. So these are some other indicators. Some of you might have done a strong interest in inventory that may be more career related, but even that is kind of helpful, I think, in getting to know each other. And then we do in Quest, we do something called Strengths Quests, which is done by Gallup, which is really interesting. It's like 39 different strengths, and what are your top 5, and how can you use them? And so these are all different things you can look into, or you may have other things that you've done in your program that can help your team get started on a neutral language to get to know each other. And the next 2 things are to do a team charter and a statement of work. So we'll talk a little bit about the team charter. And again, I think if we had more teams here, I would have you go ahead and work on one. But it's worth, even if you do a small session in your first team meeting, to take 5 minutes and talk about what you're going to do together. What are the conflicts and and just to let you know, if we're going to have these posted on your website. I'm not done with the slides for next week yet because I have to adjust a few things on them. So once I get done, I'll send it to Guillermo and he'll post it for y'all. But basically, the team charter can be a very simple thing of we're all here because we have an interest in social value creation, and we want to get some real-world consulting experience. We plan to meet once a week for an hour at this time. If anyone can't come, they should send everyone a text message. If someone is not holding up their end of the bargain, they said they're going to do something and they're not going to do it, we'll have a team meeting and we're going to send this person who's a really good communicator to talk to them about their, holding up their end of the bargain. We're going to try to maintain a positive attitude. If we need help, we're going to seek out Melissa and Guillermo, or we're going to go talk to Nicole or whatever. And then what do you want to get out of it? That's also a really important thing that I kind of mentioned at the outset. If the most important thing is that consulting experience, I think it's important for that to be in your charter. We want to be really great consultants for this nonprofit. That's something that I think is probably matters to a lot of you. So it's worth taking half an hour, 5 minutes, however long it takes you to do this, and have it be wherever you're sharing information. If it's on your Facebook site, if it's on your Google Doc site, if it's just email it out to all the team members, it's really worthwhile. Okay, so starting out with scoping. Let's see. That's your team charter. What did I say? Statement of work is next. Statement of work is going to be kind of the end result of your scope, like scoping. I know it's not really a good actual verb, but that's what we call it. We call it scoping. So the idea here is that you're getting together with your client, you're figuring out what they want, what you want, what's your team's bringing to it, what their company is, in general, what their company is like. And I think it's really important that you set up a meeting for this as soon as possible. Has anybody had a scoping meeting already? Anybody met with their clients? Perfect. Okay. So the first step would be to get out there and just set up that 1 to 2 hour meeting. Set up a block of time. It's probably going to be via conference call for some of you, maybe via Skype. If you can do it in person, do it. I mean, I know you can't go to Charleston and you can't go to Alaska, as much as that would be really nice. But if you can do a Skype call, if I don't know if they'll let you use a telepresence in OCS, but it doesn't hurt to ask. We've done Skype, and it's hard with a team to do Skype. So, but conference call is fine too if you're local, if you can get out there. It'll help you learn a lot, because the most important thing that you're going to walk away with in your initial meeting is who your client is. Especially if you have a vague scope and they're like, well, we want to get clean water out there. That's not necessarily going to get you to 3 tasks and a final deliverable. You really need to try to understand as much as possible your client. What my contact at Booz Allen that I called her and said, hey, do you have any tips? I'm going to talk to these students about it. Here's kind of what I'm thinking. She called it a data dump. Basically, you get together for 2 hours. It's just sort of like you tell your client, tell me about yourself. Tell me about your organization. The more you can learn about your organization, and I know it seems like it may not be related, but the more you can learn at the outset about the organization, the better off you're going to be when you design that statement of work. And then the better designed that statement of work is going to be, the less likely you're going to have a scope that creeps to another place where you don't want it to go along the line. So figure out who your client is. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in the next slide when I talk about my experience with this project that we proposed when we responded to the RFP. But the other thing too is that in that initial meeting, make sure your client knows who you are. And this is why it's a good idea to have your team charter. It's a great idea to tell your clients, well, here we are, we have computer science, engineering, and marketing experience. We're here to help. We're really excited, and we're really looking forward to getting a great consulting experience out of this. Or we're really passionate about fighting obesity, or their team's really passionate about the environment. Whatever it is that makes your team tick, let your client know what that is, because then that starts to sort of solidify both the client's mission, their philosophy, their background, who they are, with what your skill set is to getting to an end result that's desirable for both of you. The client, it's a two-way thing. I mean, you guys want to get something out of this. The client wants to get something out of this. I mean, you're not just here to file paperwork for them or to do data entry. And it's really important that you know that too. These people have bid. I think there's a competitive process for getting these projects to you all. So you deserve to get something out of this too. So make sure your client knows who you are. Now, the last thing I have on here is employee facilitative listening. This is something that I do with my mentors class. And I know it sounds really cheesy, but I've actually been practicing it a lot, like in real life, and it's quite helpful. Facilitative listening, what it boils down to is paraphrasing and summarizing while someone else is talking, asking questions, probing questions, and it's one of those things where you can't necessarily at the outset know what those probing questions are going to be, but they'll come up as you're listening. You'll figure out what they are. Write them down so that you're continuing to listen, but you're like, okay, I need to ask about this point because it's not clear. And then making kind of understanding noises. You know what I mean? When you're talking to someone and you're kind of like, you're nodding if you're in person, or if you're on the phone, kind of every now and then, okay, yeah, I get you, I understand. Maybe a little bit of silence to encourage them to keep talking. I mean, it's sort of basic stuff, but it's something that unless you sort of mentally force yourself to practice it, it can be hard. So, for example, yesterday I had a call with one of our alums. I guess she and one of our other alums started the mentoring program that they have out of OCS. And basically, she wants to start kind of an alumni board and start doing some fundraising. So she's like, well, we want to design a website that does X, Y, and Z. And it was a very overwhelming phone call. But as she was talking, I said, okay, so let me make sure I understand you. And then I kind of listed out the important points of what she was saying. And she's like, yeah, and. So it encouraged her to keep talking. It made her feel like I was listening to her. And then we both made sure we were on the same page. So if someone says, scope creep, you don't know what they're talking about, or benchmarking, you don't know what they mean by that. You say, okay, benchmarking. Now, how I understand that is, going out to all the different companies and comparing how you're doing to their doing on a certain level of metrics. Is that what you mean by this? No, we mean more just internal metrics, whatever. I mean, whatever the kind of the term is. So I think the important things are kind of summarizing what they're saying, doing that kind of breakdown. Here's the 3 important points of what I hear that you're saying. Asking those questions, are we clear on the same terminology? Are we speaking the same language? And then as questions come up, make sure that you ask them. If you're like me, and sometimes you have a conversation and you go home and you're cooking dinner and you're like, oh, I didn't ask this. Shoot it to them via email or give them a call the next day. I think that the fact that you're thinking about them, you're continuing, you don't have to necessarily know the question right off the bat. But ask them later on to make sure that you're clear. That's all part of facilitated listening, making sure that the other person knows that you're hearing them. And also kind of reminding yourself to listen well. So my project that I did a response or whatever, RFP for, was there's an organization at American University. I'm an oral historian. I do my dissertations in oral history, and basically I look at organizational history. So my dissertation advisor and I were going to do an oral history of this. It didn't come through because they didn't like our price point on it, but it was a great proposal. So we basically got connected with these folks. They wanted an oral history of their organization. We sat down, we had that data dump meeting. We did it over lunch at Clyde's out in, Chevy Chase. It was very, very nice. And I think if you can do it in a more informal way to encourage the person to open up about their organization, to get really a sense of who they are and why they've started this organization. I mean, this is a little shop that started because some older folks wanted some more educational opportunities as they'd retired, they wanted to teach, they wanted to learn, they wanted more community. We wouldn't have, been able to get at that if I'd gone to their office and interviewed them. This was kind of a lunch conversation that was much more informal. So getting that organizational history, who are they, why are they there, is really important. What's their background, what's their purpose, what's their philosophy? These are nonprofit organizations. They've probably put a lot of thought into all of these things. They've started because somebody had a passion for something and they have all these things somewhere. So getting that out of them. What's their organizational culture like? Is it a real flat organizational structure? Is it a hierarchical organizational structure? Are people promoted? Do people come there? A lot of nonprofits, folks will retire and then they'll come and work in a nonprofit. Is that who their staff is? Or are their staff like young 20-somethings who are fresh out of college who have a lot of energy? Is it a combination of both? Do they have a board of directors? Do they have a president? How are they president elected? All of those things. How are they structured? It's really important. Stakeholders. So in the Ollie office, they have internal and external stakeholders. They have folks that are working in the office, and then they have all of these rich people in upper Northwest Washington that come to their classes and their events. So these are all their stakeholders. And it's really important that you address the needs of all of the stakeholders that are important to your client. The nonprofits are interesting, I think, as far as stakeholders go, because in a company, a lot of times there's a profit motive. It's pretty easy to see, the shareholders are king, or the board is king, or customer is king. I mean, depending, I know that at Southwest, I don't know if you guys were here a couple years ago when the CEO came and spoke, but he said that, their employees are king. That's who matters to them, because if their employees are happy and well compensated and feel like they're, doing a good job, then the customer will be happy and everything in the business will be fine. Who is important to your client? Because that person should be important to you. So figuring that out in that initial data dump, this is kind of all the stuff that you need to figure out. How am I doing on time?
Okay. We're at about 22, 23.
Oh, okay, good. All right, we may actually get a time to do a little bit of work then. Okay, so that's my example. All right, so we're going to start. I have a few different little facilitation tools that I use with my mentors. And we're going to start with kind of this visioning exercise. I know it sounds really fancy, and there's actually a formal visioning exercise that I did with my mentors. But quite simply, the visioning exercise, this is almost something you should do with your client. So my project was to develop an oral history to be presented at the 20th anniversary of Ollie. Your project is to improve clean water, air, and food in Alaska. So I think that if you ask your client, this could be a key question for getting the conversation started. Once you've kind of gotten to know, tell us about your organization, how is it around, who are your stakeholders, getting that visioning question. So, this website's really important to you. What's your vision? In 2 years, what will this website do? And taking some notes on that and saying, the way that a visioning exercise would work on like a team setting is that you guys would kind of interview each other about this. But in your client, you're probably only going to have 1 or 2 people to work with. So what I've done is I've given to Guillermo kind of a formal how to do a visioning exercise if you want to take a look at it. But the important thing is that you walk away with what your client envisions so that you're all on the same page. And this is a great time to use your facilitative listening. So when we had this lunch at Clyde's, we sat down, and it became clear that what was important for this project was to get something that would be presented publicly at this ceremony. So they were less interested in the academic exercise of oral history and more interested in maybe having some video clips they could show at this celebration, having a written document that they could kind of live on, like this is the history of how we were founded and who we are. That was what came out, and we want to have this. We want to have it, publish it. We want to have this. We want to be able to both publish it and have something that we can present at this ceremony. So it's actually quite expensive to do that kind of work, because when you're doing transcriptions for interviews, it's very, very time consuming, and you may kind of run into some of that. So you have a budget of what, $0? So finding some ways to be effective in the cost arena is going to be important. So if you learn about your client's organization, you learn about their stakeholders, you learn about what's important to them, you focus on, you really want to get, if you're like you and you're a little more nebulous, you may see, well, what are your goals for the next couple of years? And then you may have to pull out one and say, well, our team has a lot of expertise in designing computer interaction systems or something. Our team has a lot of expertise in marketing. Our team has a lot of expertise in HR and getting employees motivated. Whatever it is that your team has a lot of expertise in. And say, we could really help you with this goal. So why don't we pull out this goal and make that the focus of our project? You may have to kind of coach them a little bit. But then saying, what's your vision? When I say this to you, what do you envision? And I think that's kind of going to be the start for your team coming up with the next thing. All right. Which is, and I know this is something that you guys are probably really familiar with, but once you do that and you get that sort of list of we want something that can be presented publicly at this celebration. We want something that can be published, and we want to make sure that you talk to all the people that founded this OLLI organization. I mean, that was what was important to my client. That goes, see if I can go all the way over here. That goes here in your ideal state, all right? So you put that up in your ideal state. Maybe your team gets a whiteboard, gets a flip chart, something like that, and you can put that up on the ideal state. This may be something you do with your client. They may not have time for this, in all honesty. But if you can sort of get some key things to feed this sort of idea in that first meeting, you're going to get a lot of information about their current state for when they give you their who we are. This is who we are. We have 2 staff people. They're old because they retired and they're 90, and this is their passion, and they live their whole lives to do this. Whatever it is, you're going to get a lot of information about their current state. And you can start either fill this in, or you can kind of give us, well, you want to develop this website to get more people involved in donating to your organization. What do you currently have? If the answer is nothing, well, then it's easy. But they may have a current model of what they're doing that they're not happy with, but you can get a sense of what it is. So the more you can get in this kind of first meeting about what their current state is with the particular goal that you've chosen, then you can go with your team and sort of look at, the gap. What you filled in for the gap is going to help you start to come up with a statement of work. So I have some questions up here. And again, since you guys will have access to this, you can see that. But, work from the vision statement. Ask them as much detail as you can about the current state. And then the current state may take a little bit of digging to get at, and digging at the current state may become part of your scope of work. If your client says, we currently, I know sometimes the goal has been, I'm trying to think of what we did last year in the project that would be relevant. I'll use my example of the oral history project that I did. They had boxes and boxes and boxes of materials, and they had a bunch of folks who were, really in their probably nonagenarians who had founded this organization and who were, on not necessarily in the best health. That's what they had. So they didn't have any sort of oral history. They didn't have any sort of documentation. They just had flat, archival type materials and folks you could talk to. That was the current state. They may not have anything. So part of what my job would be to go through the archival materials and to interview the people. So that's still analyzing the current state. So if those are 2 of your big things that you need to do, is assessing where they are. That's amazing how much you can help them. I had a project last year that I advised with the University of Baltimore where they wanted to streamline their admissions process for their graduate school. They did not even have a process map for their admissions process. I told my team, I said, look, you can probably cut their cycle time down, but if you can just give them a really good process map, that in and of itself is so helpful. Because if you have a current process map of what your process looks like, you can start to see, well, why the heck are we doing it that way? And the team actually did end up providing a lot of value in cutting down their admission cycle time but because they developed that process map. So, this could be, the current state is, if the current state's a known, then it probably won't go into the statement of work. But if the current state's an unknown, then developing a good picture of what the current state is going to be a very important part of your statement of work. So let's say that, okay, the current state's known. We know that we're going to have to do some things to maybe understand it a little better. We have this vision of what we want to do. Here's some questions to help identify the gaps. What's keeping us from the future? I know that's like really cheesy, like what is keeping us from the future? It's like, well, time, clearly. But what kinds of things are keeping us from this vision? If we want to have sometimes it's very obvious. If we want to cut down on our admission cycle time, like in the University of Baltimore project, well, we need to know how long our current admissions process takes. Okay, we need to know what the process is. We need to know all the different stakeholders who are involved. So coming up with, the different things that are keeping you from that vision will help. What are the barriers? With the admissions process, that's sometimes one of those things that you couldn't determine until you did that initial process map, and they realized that they were sending out the applications to the different advisors for the colleges, and then they were getting stuck there for like weeks and weeks and weeks. So that was a barrier, but that actually was something that they didn't notice until they did a really good analysis of their current state. Missing components, what do we need? What actions do we take? I think it's the same as the first question. But these are sort of getting at the same thing, you know what I mean? Asking your team these questions. Once you have this analysis of the current state, this can help you. So this depends a little bit, and it's a little hard to do a one-size-fits-all scoping lecture for you guys, because some of you have a client where your current state's really well known, where they have a really great vision of what they want to do. Some of you don't. So developing the current state may become your project. You may be focusing on the gap if your client already has a good understanding of their current state. So depending on where your client is, you may have to work from there. Good, okay. All right. So this, again, you have kind of a whole map of how you can do a force field analysis. It sounds really sounds like something out of Star Wars. But force field analysis, quite simply, is what resources do we have, what things are in our favor, and what things are against us. So again, part of this whole, once you've met with your client, kind of determine how much they know about their current state, how much do they not know about their current state, what's their vision for the future. Once you've done all that, this can be just a little tool that you use to develop what, help you continue thinking about the scope and what you're going to need to get. So in my case, with my project, forces that help, they have these folks, the stakeholders that were around to be interviewed. They had a bunch of materials, and they're all there. Forces that hinder is that it was going to take a ton of time to go through the materials and to interview the people. And also that we didn't have a lot of manpower because it was me and my advisor working on this project. So what are your team resources that are going to help? If your client really wants a website, but you don't have any team strengths in that area, that may be a force that hinder, or maybe you develop for them a WordPress site that isn't as involved and doesn't require HTML coding and that kind of thing. If they want a admissions process, the forces that hindered is that they didn't have the process mapped out, so that became part of what they needed. So this is kind of a way of looking at what the resources are that you have and need. Yeah?
So going back to the previous one, if suppose they have all the current state, they define the list, okay, this is our current state, and we know, and since from their goal or mission or vision, so, and we identify that these are the gaps of what we are. So I understand that it's a good idea to review that to make it more clear that this is what they want.
Right.
Because we identified these are the gaps and this is what we want to fill in.
Right. Now, so it's good because you're right. Your team will probably be the ones identifying the gaps.
Yeah.
They might say, "Here's the gaps." They might know. My gut feeling is that for the most part, they're not going to know. So one of the clients we worked with this year is Booz Allen, and Booz Allen Hamilton. I know there's mergers and acquisitions in there. I don't want to leave anybody out. So BAH came to us. It was an alum who came up with this project. They were very clear on what they thought the gaps were. If your client comes to you and they say, "Hey, here's the gaps," you may start to run into that, okay, the scope's too small, I feel too constrained, I don't have enough liberty. So you may want to open it up a little bit. We tend to use, when we're doing scoping, is kind of the 80-20 rule. We want to have 80% of the work, yeah, we know what we're doing, and then 20% for creativity, for you to bring your own team stamp to it. So that may be an effort. If they have the gaps already identified for you, well, all the better for you because you kind of know exactly what they want out of you. But you may want to open up just a little bit, say, you know, we want to add on this piece. We just want to look into this for you because this is of interest to us and we feel like we have a real team strength here. So kind of like looking at that 80-20 rule, you know, there's 20% that's always going to be kind of a question mark. But it's okay. I think, you know, the important part is that you understand what the gaps are and that they understand.
This is what we want.
Yeah, exactly.
They are looking for.
So what we'll do is when we get to, these are just some tools for you to kind of go through with your team to think about things. You may not actually share the whole shebang with your client. I mean, they may not want to see your thought process. What you will share, though, is a statement of work. And that is almost something that, I mean, you may even want to like have it signed depending on your client. I don't know if you guys have any requirements.
We'll do client agreements. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because so you know, this is something where, okay, here's the primary statement of what we're doing. Here's the 3 tasks we're going to do along the way. Here's how many people hours that it's going to take. Here's the final deliverable you want. Really important to agree upon that. And so this is all just going to feed information into that scoping document. And also, you may not need to use some of these tools depending on how much client thinking your client has done. It kind of depends on where you are in the process and who your client is. All right, so gap analysis. Yeah, and this is basically, the only reason I bring this one up, all of these tools too can be used later on at any point to you know, if you have an ideal state and a current state to say, you know, let's regroup and see what we need. The Forcefield analysis too, I mean, if your client, you can actually use this in your project, like where the Baltimore team was doing the admissions process. They use stuff like this to say, well, you know, the forces that help are the fact they have this great online system. The forces that hinder are the fact that they have 2 separate systems with 2 different sets of rules for students to submit their application through. So you may kind of use some of these tools later on to actually do the work that your client is looking for, to kind of analyze what they're looking for. Because these are all good analysis tools. They're a little more qualitative, and that's just because my bent is more qualitative, and you guys may have some other quantitative tools that you're going to bust out that will be very helpful. But I think that scoping is not a quantitative thing for the most part. It's very qualitative. It's very touchy-feely. It's all about, do we understand each other? Are we all on the same page? Does your client feel as if they're being listened to and understood by you? And do you feel like you're getting what you want out of the experience? Okay, so your statement of work. The way that this works is you may want to have like a little blurb. You know, here's the current state. Here's our client situation. What are your key questions? I mean, 1 or 2 key questions probably would be satisfactory. Your client may already have those questions. You may have to come up with those depending on your situation. So what are those 2 questions? And they can be pretty detailed or pretty, I mean, the more detailed the questions can be, then the easier they are to answer. So you kind of want to leave some leeway. So for the Baltimore project, I think the questions were, what does our current admissions process look like? And then the next question is, are we meeting students' needs? Are we satisfying our students? And ultimately, I think you would say the goal for that project was they want to up their admissions. I mean, numbers in the door means you get more students in chairs, you're getting more tuition dollars, you're getting a better, hi Kartik, you're getting a better kind of, if you're going to use this process and people are going to go through this process, you want more people to get their acceptance letter from Baltimore and say, yep, I'm going there for grad school. And in fact, anecdotally, the project, I was the advisor for this project, one of my students came back, told me that her friend applied to the University of Baltimore after her team had done this admissions process, and the response from the University of Baltimore was the first one that he got back, and that's why he accepted that as his grad school, because it was the first response that he got. So that was, I think she had a lot of pride in that because that was the project she worked on, and it clearly made a valuable difference to Baltimore getting more students in their classrooms. So, you know, kind of getting those things like, what's the primary goal, and then what are some questions that can help us achieve that goal for the client. I don't have goal up there, but that should be kind of the overarching thing. What's kind of the primary goal? Then you want to get to some tasks along the way. Does your client want, you know, they want a process map. They want an analysis of their cycle time. They want interviews. They want a focus group. They want whatever. You know, 5 is a lot, unless they're real small, but you know, use your judgment. You know how many person hours you have to dedicate to the project. You probably should put it in your statement of work. 3, I think, is ideal. I mean, if you can get 3 tasks, maybe it's just a simple report, like a PowerPoint presentation on the current state of their competition, a PowerPoint presentation on the current state of their website development, their current state of donors, and it may take a lot of analysis to get there. Second one may be something like initial recommendations on different software packages you can use to develop more donors for your program. And then the final one would be, this is our final recommendation and a report on why you should choose it, or a budget analysis of why you should choose it, or something like that. So kind of those primary tasks. And then what's the final deliverable look like? Is it a report? Is it a PowerPoint? Is it a presentation to the board? Is it all of the above? I mean, as long as you sort of know. I mean, generally, we kind of define the deliverable for our projects in Quest. They do a report and they do a final presentation. Your client may want a mock-up of a website. They may want a marketing strategy, that's in a particular document that you and they agree on. So whatever it is that they want, make sure that it's in the statement of work. Dates, so each of those primary tasks should kind of be linked to a date. And this will help you when next week we talk about Gantt charting, project management in general. You may want to tie each of those tasks, say, okay, by the end of October. Now you guys you just got your scopes, right? Or no, kind of, sort of.
Just got their project.
Just got their projects.
My description of like the loose scope.
Yeah, that's what I give my students too. I'm like, oh, here's the scope. And then they meet with their clients and they're like, oh, this wasn't quite what you said, Nicole. I'm like, well, that's because the client changed their mind in the interim. So we do the best we can. So, you probably have a loose scope. What you need to do is probably set up that initial meeting. But in that initial meeting, kind of deciding on those primary tasks, what are the things along the way that are checkpoints? I think, if you could aim to have the scope done by the end of September, it's probably reasonable. That's the timeline we give to our students. Then in October, and this is totally what we do for our students, but it could work for you guys too. In October, maybe mid-October, maybe the scope document is the first task that you have on here. Could be the important thing. That's the first task is clear, identify the scope. We make our students give their client scope and action plan. So that basically means scope, and here's my Gantt chart. Clients love it. People love Gantt charts. I mean, you may not follow them by the letter, but people love to see a Gantt chart. So that's going to make people happy, for the most part, unless they're very touchy-feely and they don't like Gantt charts. But it does help your team stay on task. At least if you look at your Gantt chart and you're way off, you can regroup. So we'll talk about making a Gantt chart next week. But scope may be the first thing. Site visit is usually important if you can in like October timeframe. You may want to have your next deliverable due by the end of October, your next kind of task done by the end of October. And then you might want to do a touch point, a smaller task, done before you leave for Thanksgiving break, and then the final deliverable comes in December. That's the general timeline we do with our Quest students. They're doing projects the same timeline that you are. So there's a September deliverable, an October deliverable, a November deliverable, and then the final deliverable. And that kind of just sets a nice timeline that fits with your schedule and then the client has their expectations done. This all isn't going to be done next week. You're not going to get a final report before the end of the semester. So tying those tasks to dates. And then the other thing too is anticipated person hours. When I spoke with some of our folks, our alums who are out in consulting, they're like, well, the client will think this takes 3 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever. It's kind of difficult for you all to do that because 3 weeks of a consultant's time is not the same 3 weeks as an MBA's time when you've got classes and you're looking for jobs and all this other stuff. So set those expectations, and I think what I would do is internally for your team, kind of know a week means that we're each going to spend 5 hours on it or whatever. I think a client is going to like to see, okay, I'll have this done in 3 weeks or I'll have this done in 6 weeks. But you guys are going to need maybe a little more guidance on like a week means I'm going to spend 3 hours on this, 4 hours on this, whatever. We're going to have one team meeting, whatever the case may be. So there may be kind of like an internal timeline and an external timeline. So tying all that stuff. And so that ultimately is your statement of work. So back to what we were talking about with the gap, this kind of gap analysis thing. You may not share the gap analysis and the visioning exercise and some of these things that you're doing with your client. You may, it depends on your client. The statement of work should most definitely be shared with your client because you can submit it to them and then they're like, you know what? I don't really think task 2 is that important anymore because we really want to focus on getting this particular thing done. So can you just make this task 3 into 2 parts? The budget is what's most important. So can we have an initial budget analysis and then like further recommendations once we go over it? A lot of times what we do in our projects is the students will come up with 3 recommendations. So a few years ago, Lockheed Martin they asked our students to look at their buoy farm that they have out off the coast of somewhere on the West Coast. They have these buoy farms that basically the buoys are in the ocean. They advertise now in the New Yorker. I was actually quite proud to see that because my students worked on that project. So the buoys kind of move in the ocean like this and they create energy somehow. The students were tasked with coming up with how to get those buoys out to the buoy farm in the ocean. And what they did was, I think about maybe early November, they submitted 3 different recommendations to Lockheed. He said, A, B, C, here's your recommendations. The team really liked, recommendation B, but Lockheed was sort of said, no, I want you to focus on doing more research on recommendation A because that's the one that we're most excited about. And this happens over and over and over again. The students will come up with 3 recommendations. They kind of maybe like a little one's maybe a little lower cost. The client will ultimately be the one that has to take on this and implement it. So they're going to be the one to pick it. So they may say, you know what, we want those recommendations a little earlier so that you have more time to investigate the recommendation that we really care about. So that's kind of why you want to submit the statement of work, have a little bit of back and forth on it, schedule an hour conference call to go over it. Because if you don't agree on the statement of work and really understand what it is that you're all there to do, it's going to be a little bit harder if they suddenly will come up with something in a Halloween that they want you to do. Oh, really? Can you add this? It's going to be so cool if you can do. You guys have done such great work. You're so smart. Do this too. It's going to be hard if you don't have a statement of work that you all have really, really talked about and agreed upon. It's difficult to say no, essentially. You won't be able to say no. You'll be like, sure, we'll do that too. And that's scope creep right there. All right. I think this might be the last. Oh, no. Okay, scope creep. So I think we have a little bit more time. I basically just said this already, but the whole reason that we're focusing so much on this idea of visioning and this idea of the gap analysis and doing these tools to really make sure that you understand your client, you've heard your client, is so that, in October, when you submit your first task and they look it over, they're like, this is awesome, can you look at this piece of it that, you just happen to include and whatever, that you can go back to the statement of work and really look at it together. Now, it's tricky because you want to make your client happy. And the folks at Accenture and Booz Allen, whenever we take our students out there, we always talk about scope creep. And what I love is that they say, their team goes, and their client will say, U.S. Postal Service or DOD, or whoever their client is, will say, you know what, you guys, can you look into this piece of this? We really want you to do some more research on that. The folks at Accenture and Booz Allen say, sure, no problem. It'll be an extra 6 weeks and this much money. I mean, they say, sure, no problem, we'll make you happy, but that's not an original statement of work, so give us more money. And a lot of time the client says, sure, here you go. I love that. I mean, it's just so funny. You guys can't do that, though. They're not paying you. You don't have an extra 6 weeks. You have to find a way to politely keep it tight. So a couple different sort of solutions for this. One is that the client asks you to do something that's not in your statement of work. It'll happen. You don't want to make your client mad. So what you do is take out the statement of work and say, hey, that's a really great idea. I can see that's really important because when we talked about your mission as an organization, I understand how important it is for a higher level of diverse students to get into the University of Baltimore. So suddenly maybe Baltimore says, you know what, can we make diversity an important component of what you're doing when you're looking at our admissions process? You're like, I understand that, as an institution, that's an incredibly important mission. So validating what they want, because it is your client, you do want to make them happy. Saying, I understand, we really listen to you and your mission, and I think that's such a great thing to want, and et cetera. However, pull out the statement of work. If we do that, we can do that. Here's what we can do. We can add some demographics to the survey. We can add it to, if there's something on your statement of work that you're already doing, or maybe you can just tweak it, go ahead and make your client happy. So for that example, say my students did some surveys of the University of Baltimore students. They distributed some surveys, they did some interviews. They could add a couple demographic questions to the survey to make sure that diversity is important, or ask a question, is this an important reason why you're applying to the University of Baltimore? If it's something that you can add, like really just tweak in a small way to something that's already on your statement of work, go ahead and make them happy because it's going to give them a little more, feeling like they're being cared for. If it's a whole other task, like we no longer want you to look at the process of admissions, we want you to go talk to the Office of Diversity and see how we can increase the applicants that are from different backgrounds or international applicants or whatever it is, then you're going to have to say, well, we can do that, but that's really going to interfere with us getting this done on the initial statement of work. So they may say, how long will it take for you to do that? You may say, well, it'll take us 3 weeks to get that research data, or you may say, let's talk with our team, and this is how long we think it'll take. And they may say, well, we want to take this piece out and add this piece in. You can do that. I mean, that's up to the discretion of your team, but it kind of has to be a one-for-one. You have to take out something maybe else that you've done and replace this, and then have a new statement of work, and all agree upon it. So you would have to actually adjust the statement of work. Otherwise, they may say, you know what, this is really important to us, but this is more important, and looking at the statement of work, I'm reminded why we wanted this whole admissions process done, the process map and all that kind of thing done at the get-go. So we're going to table this piece, and you may say, like, maybe you can reapply to the program, to the Center for Social Value Creation. I know there's a class next semester that Nicole is teaching, and she's awesome, and she'll help you get this done. So offer them other solutions. Say that there's other students, maybe they can hire an intern. That you may want to say, talk to Guillermo, talk to Melissa. Maybe there's a way that they can help you get this additional piece taken care of. A lot of times, we have that happen with our clients all the time, and we just say, come back next year and give us more money for the Quest projects, and come back and work with another great team of students. And they do. They come back year after year. And this year, our Lockheed Martin team is working on a project that builds off of the project they did last year. It's great. There already has a lot of work done, a lot of legwork done by very talented students that the current students can take, build upon, and the client is extra happy. They're getting more, they're really getting something that is, over the course of time, been developed quite well for them. So that's kind of, I think, the way to react to that. I think it's really important, that statement of work at the outset, making sure you understand your client. Those things are really going to help you when you kind of get to this piece where they ask you to do something different. I think that's it for the scoping piece. Yeah, because this starts to do the project management piece. So what we're going to do next week, I think if we have a similar number, the idea is that next week you would actually walk out with a Gantt chart. Depending on how many people we have, the idea is that you would get some team time out of it. And I would kind of coach you through creating a Gantt chart. Depends. I think, if the same number comes, we can probably still do, because I've done it with this size audience before. It's a little less useful for the folks at home, but it kind of gets you a chance to actually do some work while you're here, which is a nice benefit. But I guess I can stop there. I think we have about, 10 minutes left. So if you want to ask me a few questions, I'm happy to answer any questions, and then I'll look forward to seeing y'all next week.
So a lot of these guys just got, the undergrads got their teams yesterday.
Okay.
And the graduate students got their teams on Friday.
Okay.
So we're literally setting up those first touch points. I know that you had a couple of slides on what to talk about in the first client call.
Yeah.
But, is there anything that you would emphasize over something else? Because that's a conversation that all these guys would have.
In the near future. I don't even think it's a matter of information so much as what we do is, yes, there is one thing that you have to absolutely do. And that is figuring out we'll have to finish up in 5 minutes. Figuring out what's important to them as far as non-disclosure intellectual property. Now, Guillermo, the way that it works with these guys, I know that's how we work, but basically the client owns the intellectual property of any work that these students do.
We are redesigning the client agreements this year so that we are able to use the work the students do for training purposes.
Okay, cool. But in general, the students couldn't then go out and get a patent on the work that they do.
Oh, no.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
this is this is an issue that comes up. That the clients, because they're paying clients, it's a lot more clear cut, and the students don't like it sometimes. But we're like, hey, tough. Your client in general owns the intellectual property. So if they want to go make $1 million off of what you did because they signed this agreement, it's a little less of an issue, I think, sometimes with the nonprofits. But you never know. But make sure that those things are part of. I wouldn't start off with that. Don't lead with that. Is there any non-disclosure? Do they have competitors that they don't want you to disclose any information for? If you go work at a competitor, or someone that might want to know this information, how do they feel about that? Is something that I would definitely address. In general, the most important thing that you're doing in that initial meeting is setting the tone, showing them that you care about them, showing that you have those facilitative listening skills, and the more summarization, so let me make sure that I understand what you're saying. Use that, practice that phrase in front of your mirror, whatever. But the more you can do that and say, here's what I understand what you're saying. Let me get this straight. Is this the most important thing to you? Well, no, da-da-da. The more you can do that and employ those facilitative listening techniques. So I sent Guillermo a thing, and it has some catchphrases. If this isn't something that you're good at, I'm not necessarily good. I'm more of a talker than a listener, I think, quite honestly. But I practice it with my mentors, with my students, with my alums, with my clients. I practice it, and those are some good phrases. And once you get in the habit of doing it, it makes you a lot better listener, even at home with your girlfriend, boyfriend. So I think that setting the tone is really important. And then, do they have any concerns about proprietary stuff, non-disclosure? Is there anything they want you to sign, or what is all that? Those would be one thing. Besides getting kind of the idea of the organizational culture, I think too with nonprofits, it's extremely important to understand the stakeholders. Who are their stakeholders? Who do they care about? If you don't, it's hard to serve them if you don't know who they care most about. And then because maybe everybody's different. Just like Southwest, their employees are kind of king. Somebody else, the customer, is king. For your nonprofit, maybe their board is king because their board raises all the money. So find that out. It also may not be something that's real obvious, and it may not be a question that they answer, so you may have to get at it in other ways and be like, so, who do you talk to on a regular basis? What's a day in the life at this organization like? What are the most important events that you do? I mean, you may not say, like, do you have a board, and is that the most important person to you? No. I mean, they may not answer it that way, because maybe they want to say we serve the people, but actually their board allows them to serve the people, if that makes sense. I mean, if their board is out there raising money, then they can go out and save a whole lot more wildlife in Alaska. So you kind of have to get at that sometimes with a little bit of just listening and summarizing rather than asking direct questions about it.